I love journeys. I love quests. And even as a young boy, I remember my friends knocking at the door, asking me to go out, and I'd be buried into the Narnia Chronicles, Susan and Edmund and Lucy and Peter, or the Lord of the Rings. And then as I got a little bit older, I found this Reader's Digest condensed books, and inside it, there was always an autobiography. And I absolutely got swept away with these humans that would just find a way to persevere, resilience and reinvention. They'd find this room to grow and overcome things. Even today, when I'm looking at any streaming service, it's always a rock documentary of a band that came out of a bar and ended up conquering the world, or an athlete or a business leader. And the one that's the tallest poppy for me in my life has been my mom. She died in her 50s of old age. The reason she was old in her 50s is that, well, she gave birth to 4 kids, something in itself, but my dad got mentally unhealthy. And very quickly, he spun out of control with bipolar disorder, and he medicated with alcohol and gambling. And she was the one that kept a roof over our house and food on our table. And we went to school with hand-sewn shirts, but mine were bright paisley and pink and purples, and I fell in love with color. And I think today, the reason I do Chatter That Matters as a podcast is in many ways to honor her and other people that I find are incredible for overcoming circumstances, chasing their dreams. And when they do, they often change our world and others for the better.
Unless you put people and results on the same step of the ladder, you will never be a great leader.
And that's what today's about. We're doing a live taping of Chatter That Matters. We have 3 incredible guests, and each one of them could be their own show. But I hope what we can do over the next half hour is just touch on some of their lessons in life.
You know, women tend to wait until they're 100% perfect for a job before they put their hand up. And that resonated with me because I am a perfectionist.
Because I think that people that have found a way to blaze a trail, to lead with purpose, lead with authenticity, lead with integrity, and more importantly, take the time to give people a hand up, I think are stories worth sharing.
I'm one voice. I have to create a group around me that can carry that message out loud and clear.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated. Today, I'm joined by 3 extraordinary women. Linda Kuga Pikulin, who's the president of Room and Women of Influence, focusing on empowering women and fostering leadership across all industry sectors. Alycia Calvert, chair and CEO of EY Canada. She brings over 25 years of experience in professional services, leading with a focus on innovation and inclusivity. And Karen Mueller, CEO of SterileCare. Karen's at the forefront of healthcare innovation, dedicated to improving patient outcomes through advanced medical technologies. Linda, I want to start with you because we have a personal connection. I had Pepsi as a client for 32 years when I was in the agency business, and Linda arrives on the Pepsi bottling side as the CEO. And this culture was so testosterone at those times. It was very male dominated. It was about getting cases on the truck, building big displays. It was almost military. In fact, most of the CEOs at the time came out of the West Point. So the whole organization was very driven this way. And Linda arrives. And the first question I have for you, Linda, is did you feel you had to adapt to that culture, or did you feel that given that they gave you the hand on the rudder, you had the ability to have the culture adapt to you?
I would say that initially I was adapting to the culture. It was a very male-dominated organization, and I was the only woman in the organization. So there was really no other woman to kind of look up to as a role model. I emulated the male behaviors for many, many years until I experienced what I would call a leadership turning point. In 1995, I was leading a business in the southeastern part of the United States, and I had a very large executive team. I was getting ready to host a divisional meeting in the southern part of the United States. And on the eve of that meeting, I received a phone call from one of my executive spouses who had passed away a few hours before. I was devastated by the loss of this executive. And so I did what you would normally do, called HR, let them know that he had passed away. I called my boss, and my boss said to me, Linda, you need to communicate the loss of this executive at the meeting in the morning. And I said, I can't. I won't do that. And he said, why? Because if I stand up in front of that organization and I start to cry, I will be devastated by the fact that as a woman leader that I am sharing my emotions of deep sadness about this executive. So I said, look, I'm going to have one of my other executives communicate that message to 600 people that were sitting in the room. And I was driving to the meeting that morning. The room was full of energy. People were very excited about being there. And as I walked into the room, I told the executive that I had spoken to the night before, I would do it myself. When I stood up in front of that room, I could barely speak his name. It wasn't tears that were streaming down my face. I was crying. And the reason why I was so concerned about communicating that is because I didn't want to show this vulnerability of being a woman, demonstrating what men in the organization would, how they would typically define us, which is weak, too emotional. I just didn't feel it was appropriate for me to not communicate that message to my team. And that was the moment when I actually felt, as a woman leader, liberated, feeling as though my sense of authenticity could actually be seen by the rest of my organization. The reason why that was so important, Tony, is because prior to that, I was as tough as the men in that organization. I had no problem being direct, focused, swore like they swore, didn't really appreciate and value the quality of people that we had in the organization because it was just about the results with absolutely no empathy. So that was actually one of the greatest leadership experiences that I had because it allowed me to demonstrate to my organization that not only did I care about the results, but I cared about the people. Unless you put people and results on the same step of the ladder, you will never be a great leader.
I find that we're having this situation where it seems that we're constantly battling, taking a few steps forward, then many steps back in terms of creating that equality in the boardroom and the CEO office is you seem to be one way or the other. This is a results-driven leader. This is a people-driven leader. How do we create a culture where both are respected and embraced? And in doing so, maybe that we start realizing that we've been recruiting from one pond or the other pond versus what we should be doing is recruiting from people that can swim happily in both.
There are some very good role models in the business. And I think that you have to be able to motivate people, to inspire people, to empower people. It can't be student body left or student body right. You have to find the center. I think that the people that are sitting at the top of the house are the ones that have to actually be able to start demonstrating that type of behavior. And when leaders like myself that are sitting in the highest levels in the organization begin to demonstrate that, that's when you begin to see the leadership of the rest of your organization, that trickle-down effect really starts to permeate the organization. And that's the way that you make the change.
When did you know you were born to lead?
Well, for starters, my father died when I was 19, and I was the sole provider financially for my family. In my mid-20s, I was motivated by ambition. I needed to be successful because I had a mother who had 3 children, and I was the only one at that time that was really capable of actually bringing an income into the household. But this is what I would say about PepsiCo. PepsiCo had the greatest mentors that I have ever had, and they were all men. The one woman that I had as a mentor was the absolute worst. It was the men that lifted me up in that company, believed in me more than I believed in myself. When I joined the company, as a entry-level sales rep, I was, schlepping pop up and down the streets of, Pennsylvania, selling it to delis and restaurants and bars. But I stood back as a young woman and said, where do I see myself in this organization? What do I really want to do, and what do I really want to be? My goal was to be responsible for managing a total P&L and operating role, because from my perspective, that was where the power was. It was the power of leading that organization and the power of managing that business. And so I learned it at a very young age, part of it driven by the fact that we were broke and I needed to find a way to create a living for myself. And secondly, because I did take the time as a young leader in the organization to figure out which job that I want, and I wanted that one.
Your relationship with your siblings, because you suddenly take on as the sole provider, did that change things? And how, over time, did they ever see you again as a sister, or was it always that this was the breadwinner in the house? I mean,
they see me as I'm the boss.
You're the boss.
I have a phenomenal family. I have, I had a sister that passed away 8 years ago that was younger than me, a younger brother and sister right now. The values for me are not just about company values. They're about my own personal values. And my number one priority is my family. Nothing is more important to me than my family. And so we've worked together for all these years. They obviously can't afford to have provided for my mother the way that I was able to, but my family has lived our lives in gratitude.
Alycia, you broke some real barriers as well. I mean, they call it the big four. It's the mentality of show me the door if you're not performing. And you got to the very top. So I'm trying to understand your path that allowed a room that really likes like-minded and, and all the things the boys do, allowed you in there, and more importantly, allowed you to lead it.
When I took on the role as chair and CEO, I really pushed away from that notion that I was the first woman in Canada to hold that position of any of the big four competitive firms, because I wanted to be recognized for the fact that I got this CEO job not because I'm a woman, but because I deserved it and earned it. Really quickly after that, I learned that I needed to think about it differently. Kind of what you said about leading from the top. I needed to both lean into the fact that I became a role model, and I couldn't forget that. I needed to show and demonstrate that things were possible. I had a very different path, kind of as a great example of how many different paths can get you to leadership positions. I never really looked at the firm and said, I want to lead this firm. What I had been taught very young in my career is the best thing I could do is to say yes to opportunities that came to me. I love to problem solve. I love challenges. I love change. I like to lean into things that I'm uncomfortable around. And a partner at the time had said to me, women tend to wait until they're 100% perfect for a job before they put their hand up. Men take a flyer. They're asked if they want to take a job, and they will put their hand up even though they are highly unqualified and not ready, and they will figure it out as they go. And that resonated with me because I am a perfectionist. From that moment on, and I was very thankful for that advice really young in my career, is I just kept saying yes for things that made me very uncomfortable. And so that took me to 3 different cities with the firm. I've been in 3 different businesses. I've changed sectors. I've completely changed my networks. I've taken over not just the practice areas that I was comfortable in, but with other practice areas. And I think every single time I did that, I felt very uncomfortable. I felt like an imposter in some circumstances because I thought, what am I doing leading our accountant strategy or our overall strategy for the firm? What do I know? I'm a tax person or an accountant. But what I learned really quickly was that almost everyone, when they're taking on something new, feels a little bit like an imposter. And I should not be concerned about that. That's just like a natural feeling, and I should lean into it, and I should accept it and just be confident in my skills. And so my career has been more kind of following where the opportunities took me and saying yes at every turn, which ultimately ended up to where I am today.
As you look on your career, do you find the times you were on that new tightrope the most exciting parts of your life?
Absolutely. I don't think you can truly grow if you're in a place where you're really comfortable. I don't think you can really grow when you're a place that's really certain as to where your path is going to take you. I think when you push yourself in different areas, you learn new skills, you learn different perspectives. I think that's where you really have the opportunity to shine. And it's also why I keep around me people that are very different. You talked about mentors. I think having a group of people around you, not just your friends that look and feel like you, but people that think very differently, who have very different skills. I learn the most from just listening. I think it's really important to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with those diverse perspectives, which is why I like to see a few gentlemen in the room today as being the allies here, because I don't think women can lift themselves up alone. I think women have a lot of mentors. I think women in leadership need also sponsors. And sponsors are more than just someone who mentors and coaches you. There's somebody who believes in you and advocates for you, whether you're asking them to do that or not. And I think that's really important.
What's your advice to finding those types of mentors or sponsors? Because people might put up their hand, but very soon, am I wasting my time or is this time well spent?
I think it's about the network. So if you just spent time with the people directly around you, you're not going to find the sponsor that's going to elevate you in your career. I think it's about getting out there, getting to know different people inside and outside of your organization. Some of my best sponsors have been people who aren't even in my organization. They're my clients.
And when you're building that kind of mentorship relationship, is there one attribute that stands above all? Is it trust? Is it experience? Is there something that goes, this is extraordinary what we're doing together?
I have different people in my cache of mentors for different things. So I don't think one size fits all. I think there's people that I go to when I need advice on something that are more peer-to-peer. I have people that I go to when I need to be challenged about how I'm thinking about something and to think about it differently. And I have people I go to when I say, I want to do something more. How can I get there? And each one of those people is different. And you really need to think about the people around you in that way.
All this you've acquired and put in your knapsack, the ability to transfer across different organizations, an appetite for a tightrope, selection of different mentors. Are you bringing that into the organization? Is that part of the systemic change that you feel is less gender specific and much more the sense of humanity that we're better together?
We are a people organization. So we're 8,000 people in Canada right now. The average age is something like 27. So we are an apprenticeship model. And so when I talk to my leaders and I think about what I want to leave as a culture in our firm, it's about servant leadership. When you think about servant leadership, it's about, having that empathy for the people around you. It's about adapting the organization to make everybody successful. It's about asking how you can help make someone else better. And then collectively, we are all going to be better together. And I think if you have that servant leadership type of culture, you can get at the results, but you can also get at the place where people want to work.
I've always, maybe it's Hollywood, maybe it's my relationships I've had over my career with consulting firms, but I call it almost the Apache warhorse. You ride until they drop, you shoot them and get a new one. Young people coming in and the gauntlet was, I'm going to work you because that's how way I used to work. Is that still there? Or are you trying to change that? Because if you're trying to embrace people, I have to believe it's also the fact that their whole life has got to be as important to their value at work versus making your whole life at my firm.
My background for a lot of my career was I was in M&A tax, so deep technical specialty in a deal space. And so there wasn't that many women in that space. My family's the most important thing to me as well. I just made it work. I figured out what were my non-negotiables. I needed to be home for dinner at 5:00 every night. I had to figure out, how do I not let my team down? Because being a family provider was also important. So how do I not let my team down? How do I excel at my career? But how do I make sure that my non-negotiables are taken care of? And I just stuck to those principles and I didn't kind of apologize for those kinds of things. So I found ways that made it work for me. I'm not going to say that they're going to work for everyone, but they worked for me. And for me, it was, I went home to be home for dinner, but I did get up very early in the morning and I probably worked 3 hours or 4 hours before anyone else was thinking about having breakfast. And that way I could really make sure that I was delivering to the team. I wouldn't highly recommend that, by the way, but it worked for me. But that's how I wanted to be, showing up at the firm. And so it worked.
When we return, we'll focus our attention on Karen Mueller and what she's doing to improve healthcare, not just in Canada, but around the world. plus my takeaways.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman, host of Chatter That Matters. A big shout out to RBC for sponsoring the RBC Canadian Women Entrepreneur Awards and shining an important spotlight on Canada's most impactful women, the ones who have demonstrated excellence both locally and globally. Canada's economy and our local communities need more women entrepreneurs to drive growth and positive social change. We'll all be better for it. Women entrepreneurs, they matter to Canada and they matter to RBC.
Joining me today is Linda Kuga Pikulin, President of Room and Women of Influence, Alycia Calvert, Chair and CEO of EY Canada, and Karen Mueller, CEO of SterileCare. Karen, I'm going to go to you because I think it's really interesting when we're having that pre-conversation that it was your insights as a nurse that really opened your mind to possibilities. And take us back to that time and what you experienced and how some people open their minds to this isn't just status quo, but this is status quo that can be changed.
So when I graduated and started my first year nursing, I think as a nurse, we always remember one of the first deaths we experience. So I had a 21-year-old girl that had kidney failure and was waiting for a new kidney. And she had this catheter that sits inside her circulatory system to clean out her blood because her kidneys couldn't do it. And she died from an infection from that catheter, not from her kidney failure. So that's considered hospital acquired. It's something that's preventable. I took that very serious. So that had an impact on me. I left nursing because I realized that cost drove care, that wasn't always about the outcomes. It's a giant. Money is important. It has to be functional from a money perspective. I went into the financial side of healthcare. Over time, I ran into this inventor that solved the problem that I encountered as a nurse. So I immediately knew that this was big. It was about everything my compassion, my willing to make change, taking care of the patient, quality of care. I ran with that. It was a no-brainer for me that had to be in every hospital, available for every patient, because it was about saving lives and making a difference.
You're also dealing with the status quo that would say, well, we always have done it this way. A big part of my belief, a big part of what Canada's struggling with, what communities are struggling with, what organizations are struggling with is these invisible bars of status quo. We feel safe even when we're standing on shifting sand. How do you overcome that in a profession like healthcare that's very rigorous in terms of what they do and convince them that there is a better way?
That's a very loaded question. It's tough. We're a price-based procurement system in healthcare. It's all about the cost of the dollar, not value-based, about the outcomes versus the dollar. We are in a reactive healthcare system versus a proactive. What I do is changing healthcare policies around the world. So I start in my homeland. Canada's probably one of the toughest markets to get into, but I believe it's a lot of what you're talking about: mentors, sponsors. I'm one voice. I have to create a group around me that can carry that message out loud and clear. It's working at every single level of function in the healthcare system to make change. It's not simple. You have to look at everything from a big picture.
My world was always about communication. And I always said head, heart, and hands. If you have an idea, make it easy to understand, make it emotionally, so somebody's emotionally vested in it, and make it easy for them to take on. What you're saying, though, is that you've got to adjust that in a variety of different ways, because you got procurement that just wants price. You might want somebody that's running a hospital that wants results, and everywhere in between. How did you find a way to adjust your style so that you could win over the audience versus just try to win your argument?
I'm the fourth of 6 children. I was 5 years younger than my oldest sibling. So in order for me to get what I needed, I had to listen to everything that was going on, figure out when I had the moment to speak, that I was clear and concise and I was heard. I think that's carried through for me up until now. I took my time to figure out what was it that had to be said. How is it going to be said that everybody could understand from the chair that they sat in? And then how do you disseminate that to everybody to carry the same message?
To me, a nurse is as servant leadership as you can get. You're now having to serve the needs of your organization and obviously the clients you serve. How did you make that move from being, I'm responsible for this moment in time, for I'm responsible for the many moments that are going to happen after this moment?
I don't know. It just happens.
Was there anything in you that felt you were meant to lead a moment in time, or was there somebody that reached out, or is this just something that manifested over time?
I was a leader from the beginning. I just didn't see it. I always stepped out and said, I'll do that. I'll do that. I'll do that. Again, when this inventor came in front of me, I was so empowered about what the change it could make and the difference it could make that I just unknowingly took it on. You know, had I known then what I know now, would I do it again? Because there was a lot of roadblocks, a lot of learning curve. Did I see myself as taking this and leading it? I didn't look at it that way. I just looked at it as, you know, this is what has to be done. I'm going to do it. Now I understand that I'm a leader and what it takes to pull everybody together, but it's the same philosophy. The compassion for the patient, the compassion for my team, patient-centered care, employee-centered care. It's all transferable.
You know, I didn't do justice and thank RBC for sponsoring Chatter That Matters. This is about positivity and possibility. I wish I could spend an hour with each, and I'm probably going to reach out to all three of you to do your own thing. But just my key takeaways, you know, Karen, I love the fact that you were open and honest enough to talk about how traumatic that situation was and how you probably took a lot of it personally to blame. But instead of going on your back feet or saying, I'm not capable, I'm going to change. I'm going to change the status quo. And I think that's a great lesson for all of us. And we all hit these obstacles. And it's very easy to fall back on our back feet. You didn't. I love your openness to mentorship and the sense that you've got to go outside. It can't be just one Yoda. We need a variety of Yodas in our life, and we got to listen generously. And I think that's very often when we're scared or nervous or intimidated or forceful even, we don't want to listen. We just want to do it our way. Linda, I never saw that soft side on you because I was on the other side and you were just considered one of the great leaders of PepsiCo. You came in the bottlers. We're struggling. But just the fact that you shared that story today of crying and coming out of it and realizing that I could be authentic and relevant as a woman leader, I think was magic as well. So I think these ladies deserve a massive round of applause. Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.